In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how I painted this Octane model and diorama for the Apex Legends board game. Along the way, you can learn about how to magnetize the Apex Legends diorama bases, how to use reference pictures to help choose your color palette, paint a pale skin complexion, approach greens and blacks on different textures, make them subtly different from one another, and use fast but effective painting techniques to complete those dioramas quickly and make them really pop on the tabletop. I recently received my copy of Apex Legends, the board game from Glass Cannon Studios. It is quite a beast of a box, and although I am unable to play at the moment, I'm looking forward to the opportunity to play with friends. In the meantime, I thought it would be great to paint up the Legends along with their awesome diorama bases. Some of the Legends come with coloured transparent plastic to emphasize their special equipment or abilities. However, with them fixed to the models, I have not decided on whether I am going to paint over them or try to paint around them. Until that time comes, I can make a start on the Legends that don't have this coloured plastic. And of them, Octane really stood out as a great model to start with. A daredevil extraordinaire who speeds himself up with stim injections at the expense of health and using his Launchpad to reach areas of the battlefield that others simply cannot reach so easily. His sculpt has a wonderfully dynamic pose, the quality of the models are pretty good for injected mold plastic that you usually get with board games. Some of the details are a little muddier than I'm used to from other miniature games though, but it certainly isn't that bad. I think we can still make this guy look pretty awesome. But before we put the brush to paint, I wanted to magnetize the model to the diorama base. Living in Japan, I'm going to be playing this at community centers and will want to make sure I can transport the models safely. Using some 2mm diameter magnets, I found that the lip on the reverse of the base was almost exactly the same depth as the magnets, so I did not even need to drill any holes into the model, which is always a relief. However, I was going to need to do so with the diorama base. To make sure the magnets would line up for the best match, I put an extra magnet on the 3 that were stuck to Octane's base so that they would protrude. I then put a dab of paint on each and placed them onto the diorama the way I wanted him to face. This marked 3 spots onto the diorama base, giving me a guide of where to drill. I then took my rotary tool and with a 2mm drill bit proceeded to drill holes. The plastic on the diorama base is quite hard and it took a bit of force, but eventually we broke through and made some holes clean through. The next part is very important, as a mistake here would be very frustrating to correct, and that's making sure that the polarity of your magnets are aligned correctly. To help with this, I made sure that all the magnets already stuck to Octane's base had the same facing, and then placing a magnet to them I could ascertain the alignment. I placed a little glue on the hole and pushed the magnet in so that it was flush with the base. After drying, Octane could now be placed securely on his diorama base without fear of falling off. The Launchpad's base was more indented, so I used a larger magnet on the underside and just a single small magnet on the diorama. This seemed to hold it in place well, and it didn't need any further support to keep it from falling off. Finally, we are ready to paint, and when painting miniatures you do not want to paint directly onto the plastic, as it is hard for acrylic paint to adhere to. Therefore, it's important to apply a primer. This can be done by simply painting on a coat of paint that covers the plastic. This can be any colour you like, but a common way to prime is in black, as it's easy to see if the model has been properly covered, and when it comes to painting, you can leave the recesses black, helping the model pop on the tabletop. Personally, I use an airbrush to zenithal prime. This involves airbrushing or painting the model black, and then airbrushing white from above as if it were light from a midday sun. I find this helps me to see how I want to highlight based on light when I am applying colour. If you do not have an airbrush, this can be achieved by dry brushing white with downward strokes over a black primed model. It doesn't give exactly the same result, but it really helps to make details pop for you when you are painting. We are almost ready to start slapping paint, but as I am not that familiar with Apex Legends the video game, I wanted my colour schemes to be as representative of the model's artwork as I could get them. To help me with this, I like to prepare a pin board of the character's artwork to help me with understanding what colours should go where and to help me choose the colours that I need to reflect the art as best as I can in the miniature. PureRef is a particularly good app for this, and with the board open you can easily just click and drag images you find off the internet directly onto the board and rearrange them. I will then keep this board open as I paint so that I can keep referencing back to it. Now, we are finally ready to paint. I wanted to begin with the skin. It was going to be the part of the model that is hardest to paint without overbrushing onto his clothing. His skin is also quite pale, and I really wanted to try and reflect that in the tones I used. One of my favourite skin tones sets that I own is the Vallejo Nocturna Fairy Flesh skin tones. Normally I would use a reddish skin tone as a base, but with Octane looking almost sickly pale, I chose to begin with a paler tone mixed with a very dark green as the base. This gave a very muted dark skin tone that would act as a great base for pale skin. Paler and paler skin tones were then built on top of one another in smaller and smaller highlighted areas of the skin to create a natural transition between the upper surfaces of the skin down to the muscle recesses and shadowed areas. With the lack of red in the skin tones, it made for a lovely pale skin that I was happy with and helped set the atmosphere of the model early on. Next, I wanted to tackle the green of his jacket. Looking at the artwork, we can see that there are a variety of greens throughout the character's design. The green of the jacket, the goggles, lining of the pants, and the pipes feeding stim juice directly into his veins, each was subtly different from one another. So bearing that in mind, I wanted them to be identifiably different in the painting as well. The jacket was the most muted of the greens. It lent into a yellow green, but this too was muted, so it definitely needed more grey mixed in to help desaturate it compared to other greens on the model. Mixing a touch of black with a woodland green made a great base, and this was then highlighted with a desaturated yellow green. The shirt under his jacket and part of his leggings can be read as white, but it's a very warm white. When painting, it's important to remember that even if something reads as pure white, you never paint it pure white. There are always subtleties of colour to add depth and help a texture read as white. I wanted to try and get this right on the miniature, so rather than white, I aimed for pale sand as the highlight colour. To help add the depth though, I mixed burnt umber with the pale sand to create a base colour and then progressively raised up to the pale sand. Before moving on to other areas of the model, I wanted to map out everything that read as being black. This included his head covering, face mask, gloves, tank top, gun and mechanical legs. This then helped me see what was left to paint and cover the areas that I missed with the green or pale sand. I wanted to then tackle the pipes from his stim packs and help make them stand out from the green of his clothing. AK's frog green and deep yellow were particularly useful for this as they are bright, saturated colours that give lovely chemical green glow. With the model now covered, it was time to tackle the black, and just like white, nothing is pure black, so we needed to add texture. For the clothing such as Octane's headwear, gloves and mask, I wanted a simple shine to the cloth. This meant using a dark grey highlighted to a light grey where the light reflects the most, but because it is cloth we want the transitions to be diffuse and not too heavy on the contrast. I also wanted the grey of the cloth to be warm while making the gun and bionic legs cold. So rather than mixing white into the black to make a grey, I used the pale sand we used earlier. With the paint then thinned down, I applied lighter and lighter coats for where I expected light to reflect off the cloth. Conversely, for Octane's gun and legs, as these were more mechanical, I wanted a harder contrast between light and dark, along with a colder tone. To get the tone I wanted, I added a touch of blue to a neutral grey made with white and black. I focused a lot on hitting edges more with these progressively lighter tones, and even went all the way up to white to have a stronger contrast of light. So, although there is a lot of black on the model, it still reads visually differently depending on the material. The goggles I was worried were getting lost sitting between the cap and mask and also being black, so to combat this I made the frame of the goggles a muted green. This just helped separate them and made them more visually recognizable. The lenses themselves I wanted to glow, just like the artwork. So out came frog green and deep yellow. This allowed me to make them look similar to the stim packs, but to push them a little further, I added some white for an inner glow. Now, Octane has these white fanged teeth lining his mask, which are not present on the miniature, and the sculpt of his mask is very uneven, so I knew painting these was going to be an absolute pain, but I had to give it a go to be true to his artwork. I started with a grey and tried marking in the teeth. These turned out to be way too big, but they helped to be a guide that I could follow somewhat with a white and pale sand mix. It was important to thin down the paint and wick the brush so that I could get as best brush control as possible without the tip of my brush drying out too fast. I could get a general look of teeth, but they were far from perfect. Some touch-ups with black certainly helped and they came across as passable, but certainly far from perfect. Finally, all I had left to do were some bags and equipment around Octane's waist. In his artwork, these are also an off-white, so I built them up from a burnt umber up to pale sand, and they were done too. Octane was now ready, but we had his base along with the Launchpad and Diorama still to paint. So let's go and hit up that Launchpad first. Using some pictures of the Launchpad from the game, I tried to match colours as best as I could. This included a grey scale for the metal of the Launchpad, green for the supports, red and yellow for the arrows. The grey scale on the metal was achieved by going from black to a dark blue grey and then mixing in some white for the final highlights. When approaching painting metals with a grey scale, aim highlights on any edges as these are the most likely to reflect the most light, especially on corners. The green was mixed with a touch of black to darken it and then highlighted without the black to give it a touch of texture. The same was done for the red arrows. The yellow arrows were first painted a brown yellow, as browns generally have a very good coverage, whilst yellows do not. With that as a base, the following yellow is given greater opacity. Until now, we have been taking a lot of care with how we paint, mapping out colours carefully, adding highlights and blends where necessary, and adding edge highlights to help make the model pop. Well, from now on, we are approaching the diorama base with reckless abandon. I do not mean that we are giving up on making it look good, but that a more cavalier style of painting is actually going to serve in making a really good looking diorama base. The main map that is reflected in the board game is Kings Canyon, a dusty and sandy wasteland of warm ivories, yellows and browns with some scattered green foliage. So let's paint it like that by picking out 4 paints that reflect the colours of the map. And what do we do with them? Well, slap that brown over everything except the walls. Get yourself a cheap makeup brush, and after loading it with a warm yellow brown like the scrofulous brown I used, rub out all of the excess onto kitchen paper and then dry brush over the entire scene with the aim of highlighting all the raised edges, making them pop against the brown base coat. Once that is done, do it again with a warm ivory like pale sand. Easy! We do the same thing for the walls with a dark blue grey getting dry brushed up to a light blue grey. When dry brushing the walls, aim to hit with the downward strokes so that the edges that get highlighted are the ones facing up. It helps to make the wall seem like it's being lit by the midday sun. Finally, the foliage is covered in a dark green and dry brushed with a yellow green and a nice bright AK frog green. Already this is looking really cool and we could finish there, but it looks a little pale to the brightness of Kings Canyon from the video game. Our secret ingredient for intense color? Pigment powders. As pure pigment, the powders have intense color properties, and as a powder, they are great for having a very natural dispersion. Great for natural terrain elements. Using an old brush, I began with black powder around any areas with walls, helping them stand out from the rest of the terrain while simultaneously connecting them to the environment with a faded frame. I then followed this with some red oxide, targeting the bases of rock ledges and again for a similar effect for the walls but a colour suited for the outcroppings. The yellow oxide conversely was used for any raised surface areas to add contrast to any elevation on the diorama. Finally, some green pigment powder was used to help intensify the center of any foliage where the vegetation was the thickest. And as with all good miniature paint jobs, it cannot be complete without a clean, black painted edge to the base. As my first Apex Legend diorama to paint, I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. It was fun researching the character and working out the color scheme. The model itself was a lot of fun to paint, but giving him a diorama base that just made it much more fun to work on, as it really places the miniature into the world of Apex Legends. I really look forward to approaching the other models in this game, and hope you will join me for this series to see how we can paint up these models to look great when we play. So if you want to see more, please like, comment and subscribe. And now I will simply leave you with the finished model, the speed freak legend himself, Octane.